Hey everyone, hope you're doing well, and I'm so glad you've decided to join us again. Tonight we are exploring how medieval engineers tracked bridge repairs. So before you get comfortable, please take a moment to like and subscribe. If you genuinely enjoy our nighttime stories, let me know in the comments where in the world you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always so fascinating to see who's joining us from around the globe. Now it's time to dim the lights and relax as we start our story. In the year 1147, along the gentle waterways that meandered through the marshy lowlands of what we now call Belgium, a most particular system of record-keeping was beginning to take shape within the guilds of bridge builders and stone masons. The Guild of Master Bridgewrights, established in the cathedral city of Bruges just 3 years prior, had implemented what they called the Librum Pontium Curationis, or the Book of Bridge Tending, a leather-bound volume that would house the detailed accounts of every repair, inspection, and maintenance procedure performed upon the stone bridges that carried merchants and pilgrims across the countless streams and rivers of Flanders. Master Willem van der Steen, whose family name would one day be carved into the foundation stones of 7 major crossings, had been appointed by the guild as the first keeper of bridge records, a position that required him to visit each registered bridge within a territory spanning roughly 40 miles in every direction from the guild hall. His duties, as outlined in the guild charter written in careful Latin script upon sheets of prepared vellum, included the documentation of stone displacement, mortar deterioration, timber decay in supporting structures, and the accumulation of debris that might impede the flow of water beneath the arch spans. The recording system that Master Willem developed over the course of that first year involved a series of wooden tablets, each measuring precisely 8 inches in length and 4 inches in width, crafted from seasoned oak, and treated with a mixture of beeswax and pine resin to protect against moisture. These tablets were carried in a specially constructed leather satchel that hung from his left shoulder, positioned carefully to balance the weight of his mason's tools that hung from his right hip. Each tablet contained a series of carved lines and symbols, developed through months of experimentation with various notch patterns and scratch marks, that allowed him to record essential information about bridge conditions, even when weather made the use of ink and parchment impractical. The notation system began with what the guild termed the Classificatio Primaria, or primary classification, which consisted of 4 main categories represented by different arrangements of vertical and horizontal lines carved into the upper portion of each tablet. A single vertical line indicated structural soundness, while 2 vertical lines suggested minor concerns requiring attention within the current season. 3 vertical lines denoted significant issues that demanded immediate guild intervention, and 4 vertical lines, used sparingly throughout the early records, indicated a bridge that posed immediate danger to travelers and required complete reconstruction. Beneath this primary classification, Master Willem would carve horizontal lines to indicate the specific nature of observed problems. A single horizontal line represented mortar deterioration, typically caused by the freeze and thaw cycles that plagued the region during the transitional months between winter and spring. 2 horizontal lines indicated loose or shifted stonework, often the result of settling foundations or the gradual movement of underlying soil saturated by seasonal flooding. 3 horizontal lines denoted timber-related issues, particularly relevant for bridges that incorporated wooden supports or railings alongside their stone construction. The most intricate aspect of these early records involved the documentation of repair procedures themselves. Master Willem had developed a secondary notation system, carved into the lower portion of each tablet, that detailed the specific materials and techniques employed during maintenance work. A series of small circular marks indicated the number of stones that required repositioning or replacement, with the size of each circle corresponding to the approximate dimensions of the stones involved. Triangular marks represented the amount of fresh mortar applied, measured in units that the guild had standardized as roughly equivalent to what could be mixed in a single wooden bucket of the type commonly used for construction work throughout the region. During the autumn months of 1148, Master Willem began supplementing his carved tablets with written records, produced during the long winter evenings when outdoor bridge work became impractical due to freezing temperatures and reduced daylight hours. These written accounts, created using iron gall ink prepared according to a recipe that combined oak galls, iron sulfate, gum arabic, and water in carefully measured proportions, provided detailed descriptions of each bridge's condition and repair history. The ink was applied to parchment using goose quill pens that Master Willem prepared himself, selecting feathers from the left wing of geese, as was customary among scribes of the period, and cutting the tips at a precise angle that allowed for consistent line thickness throughout extended writing sessions. The written records began with a standardized heading that included the bridge's location, described in relation to nearby landmarks such as mills, churches, or prominent merchant houses, followed by the date of inspection expressed according to the liturgical calendar used throughout Christendom. The bridge spanning the stream near the Abbey of St. Bavo, for example, would be recorded as being inspected on the third day following the feast of St. Martin, in the year of our Lord 1148, during the reign of Count Thierry of Alsace. Following the header information, each record contained a section devoted to what the Guild termed the Descriptio Structura, or structural description, which provided a detailed account of the bridge's construction materials, dimensions and architectural features. This description began with the foundation stones, noting their size, shape and arrangement, as well as any signs of movement or deterioration. The records would specify whether the foundation utilized local limestone, imported sandstone, or the brick-like stones quarried from deposits near the city of Tournai, each material requiring different maintenance approaches based on its specific properties and vulnerabilities. The central arch or arches received particular attention in these descriptions, with measurements recorded in ells, the standardized unit of length that varied slightly from region to region, but generally corresponded to the length of a man's forearm from elbow to fingertip. Master Willem would document the span of each arch, the height of the keystone above the water level during normal flow conditions, and the thickness of the arch stones at their narrowest point. The mortar joints between stones were described in terms of their width, consistency and color, with particular note made of any areas where the binding material had begun to crumble or separate from the adjacent stonework. The supporting structures, including abutments and wing walls that directed water flow and prevented erosion of the approaches to the bridge, were documented with equal thoroughness. The records noted the angle at which these structures met the main span, their height above the typical water level, and the condition of the stones used in their construction. Any evidence of water damage, such as discoloration, moss growth, or the formation of small caves where flowing water had gradually dissolved the mortar, was recorded along with assessments of whether such damage posed immediate threats to the bridge's stability. Throughout the winter months of 1148, and into the early spring of 1149, Master Willem's documentation system evolved to include increasingly detailed observations about the relationship between weather patterns and bridge deterioration. He began noting the correlation between periods of heavy rainfall and the appearance of new cracks in mortar joints, particularly those facing upstream where the force of flowing water created additional pressure against the structure. His records from this period describe how the combination of saturated soil and freezing temperatures caused the ground beneath bridge approaches to heave and settle, creating gaps between stone steps and the earthen pathways that led to the bridge entrances. The spring inspection season brought new challenges to the record-keeping process, as Master Willem discovered that many bridges had sustained damage during the winter months that was not immediately visible during his autumn surveys. Ice formation, particularly during periods when temperatures fluctuated around the freezing point, had forced apart stones that had appeared perfectly stable just months earlier. The expansion of water trapped within tiny cracks and crevices had created fractures that extended deep into the structural elements of several bridges, requiring the development of additional notation systems to document these more complex forms of deterioration. To address these newly identified maintenance needs, Master Willem collaborated with the Guild's Master of Works, a position held by one Godfried de Vos, whose expertise in stone cutting and mortar preparation had been refined through decades of cathedral construction work. Together they developed a classification system for repair urgency that went beyond the simple four-level system originally carved into the wooden tablets. This expanded system, recorded in the Guild's permanent ledgers using carefully prepared ink and parchment, included 7 distinct categories of maintenance needs, each associated with specific timeframes for completion and requirements for guild oversight. The first category, termed observatio continua, or continuous observation, applied to bridges showing early signs of wear that required monitoring but no immediate intervention. These structures were inspected monthly during favorable weather conditions, with particular attention paid to the progression of minor cracks and the gradual accumulation of debris around foundation stones. The documentation for bridges in this category focused on establishing baseline measurements against which future changes could be evaluated, requiring Master Willem to develop increasingly precise methods for measuring crack lengths, gap widths, and the depth of erosion around structural elements. The second category, reparatio minima, or minor repair, encompassed maintenance tasks that could be completed by a single skilled mason working for no more than 3 days. These repairs typically involved the replacement of small sections of deteriorated mortar, the repositioning of individual stones that had shifted slightly from their original positions, and the removal of vegetation that had begun growing in the cracks between stones. The records for minor repairs included detailed descriptions of the materials used, the specific techniques employed, and assessments of how well the completed work integrated with the existing structure. Master Willem's documentation of minor repairs reveals the painstaking attention to detail that characterized medieval craftsmanship. When replacing mortar joints, for example, the records specify not only the proportions of lime, sand and water used in the mixture, but also the source of each component. Lime was typically produced from local limestone heated in kilns operated by specialized craftsmen, whose families had refined their techniques over generations. The sand used in mortar preparation was often transported from specific riverbanks or quarry sites known for producing grains of optimal size and composition. Even water selection received careful consideration, with different sources preferred for different types of stone, based on the mineral content and temperature of the water throughout the year. The third repair category, reparatio moderata, or moderate repair, required the involvement of multiple craftsmen working under guild supervision for periods ranging from 1 week to 1 month. These projects typically involved the replacement of several stones, the reconstruction of small sections of arch or supporting wall, or the installation of additional structural elements to compensate for unexpected settlement or erosion. The documentation for moderate repairs included detailed drawings, created using charcoal sticks and prepared parchment, that showed the exact placement of new stones relative to existing structural elements. These drawings, while simple by modern standards, represented sophisticated attempts to communicate complex three-dimensional relationships using the limited graphic conventions available to medieval craftsmen. Master Willem developed a system of parallel lines to indicate depth and perspective, with thicker lines representing elements closer to the viewer, and thinner lines showing receding surfaces. Shading effects, achieved through careful application of charcoal dust, helped distinguish between different materials and highlighted areas where new work met existing stonework. The fourth category, reparatio major, or major repair, encompassed projects requiring the reconstruction of substantial portions of a bridge, typically involving multiple arches or the complete replacement of foundation elements. These undertakings could extend over several months and required careful coordination between the Bridge Maintenance Guild and other craft organizations, including the quarrymen, who provided new stone, the lime burners who prepared mortar components, and the transport guilds responsible for moving heavy materials to construction sites. Documentation for major repairs filled multiple pages of the guild's ledgers, with separate sections devoted to material procurement, labor scheduling, and quality control procedures. Master Willem's records from a major reconstruction project undertaken on the bridge near the market square of Ghent, during the summer of 1150, illustrate the complexity of these undertakings. The project required the quarrying and transport of 47 stone blocks, each weighing between 3 and 800 weight, from a site located more than 20 miles from the construction location. The records detail the negotiations with quarry owners, the construction of specialized transport equipment, and the arrangements for temporary bridge structures that allowed continued river traffic during the reconstruction process. The fifth repair category,
addressed emergency situations where bridge failure posed immediate danger to public safety. Termed reparatio urgentissima, or most urgent repair, these projects took precedence over all other guild activities, and required the immediate mobilization of available craftsmen and materials. The documentation for emergency repairs often began with hasty notes scrawled on whatever writing materials were immediately available, including the backs of used parchment sheets, wooden tablets previously used for other purposes, and even strips of bark when conventional materials were not at hand. Master Willem's emergency repair records from the winter of 1151 described the collapse of a bridge approach during a period of exceptional flooding, when rapid snowmelt combined with heavy rainfall to raise water levels throughout the region to heights not seen in living memory. The initial documentation, written by candlelight in the Guildhall during the early hours following the collapse, captures the urgency of the situation while maintaining the systematic approach that characterized all guild record keeping. Even under these challenging circumstances, the records include detailed observations about the failure mechanism, the condition of surrounding structural elements, and the potential for additional collapses if immediate action were not taken. The 6th and 7th repair categories dealt with preventive maintenance and long-term structural modifications designed to extend bridge life and improve resistance to natural forces. These higher-level classifications required approval from the Guild Council, and often involved collaboration with church authorities, or secular rulers, who held ultimate responsibility for transportation infrastructure within their territories. The documentation for these projects included extensive correspondence with various officials, detailed cost estimates, and multi-year schedules for project completion. As Master Willem's record-keeping system matured during the early 1150s, the Guild began requiring standardized reporting formats that could be understood by craftsmen throughout the region. This standardization process involved the development of common terminology, unified measurement systems, and consistent graphic conventions for technical drawings. The Guild's archives from this period contain numerous examples of templates and exemplars used to train new record keepers in the proper documentation procedures. The training materials included practice exercises where apprentice record keepers would examine sample bridges and prepare documentation following the established formats. Master Willem would review these practice records, providing detailed corrections and suggestions for improvement. His marginal notes on these training documents reveal the emphasis placed on accuracy, completeness, and clarity in all aspects of the documentation process. Even minor details such as the proper way to describe the color and texture of different types of stone received careful attention during the training process. The influence of Master Willem's documentation system extended far beyond the immediate needs of bridge maintenance. Other craft guilds throughout Flanders began adopting similar record-keeping approaches for their own specialized activities. The Guild of Millwrights developed systematic documentation for water wheel maintenance, while the Guild of Roof Thatchers created detailed records of material usage and repair techniques for different types of roofing systems. This cross-pollination of documentation methods contributed to a broader culture of systematic record-keeping that would characterize much of medieval craft production throughout the region. By the mid-1150s, the bridge maintenance records had grown to fill multiple volumes, each carefully bound in leather covers treated with oils and waxes to protect against moisture and insect damage. The Guild employed specialized scribes whose sole responsibility involved copying and organizing these records, ensuring that the accumulated knowledge of bridge construction and maintenance would be preserved for future generations. These scribes developed their own conventions for organizing information, including the use of colored inks to distinguish between different types of entries, and the creation of elaborate initial letters at the beginning of each new bridge record. The colored inks used in these records were prepared according to traditional recipes that had been passed down through generations of monastic scribes. Red ink used to highlight urgent repairs and emergency situations was created from cinnabar, or red ochre mixed with gum arabic and water. Blue ink, reserved for new construction projects and major modifications, incorporated ultramarine or azurite, expensive pigments that reflected the significance of the information being recorded. Green ink, used for routine maintenance and minor repairs, was typically prepared from verdigris, a copper-based pigment, that could be produced locally by exposing copper plates to vinegar vapors over extended periods. The organization of information within each bridge record followed a complex hierarchical system that allowed readers to quickly locate specific types of information. The main entry for each bridge began with general identifying information, including location, dimensions, and construction history. This was followed by sections devoted to routine inspections, with entries arranged chronologically to show the progression of wear and maintenance over time. Separate sections contain detailed descriptions of all repair work, with cross-references to related entries in other volumes where multiple bridges had been affected by similar problems. The cross-referencing system developed by the Guild scribes represented a sophisticated attempt to organize and access information across multiple volumes of records. Each bridge was assigned a unique identifier consisting of letters and numbers that indicated its location, primary construction materials, and position within the Guild's inspection schedule. These identifiers appeared at the top of each page devoted to a particular bridge, and were referenced throughout the records whenever related information appeared in other contexts. Master Willem's later records, produced during the 1160s as his system reached full maturity, demonstrate the evolution of medieval technical documentation from simple notation systems to comprehensive information management approaches. The records from this period include detailed analyses of long-term trends in bridge deterioration, systematic comparisons of different construction techniques and materials, and carefully reasoned recommendations for improvements in design and maintenance practices. The analytical sections of these later records reveal the emergence of what might be considered early forms of engineering science, as Master Willem and his colleagues began to identify patterns and relationships that could inform future bridge construction projects. They noted, for example, that bridges constructed with certain types of mortar showed greater resistance to freeze-thaw damage, while others demonstrated superior performance in areas subject to regular flooding. These observations, accumulated over decades of systematic documentation, provided the foundation for gradually improving construction standards throughout the region. The culmination of Master Willem's documentation system can be seen in a comprehensive manual prepared during the final years of his service as Keeper of Bridge Records. This manual, which occupied nearly 300 pages of carefully prepared parchment, synthesized decades of experience and observation into a systematic guide for bridge construction, maintenance, and documentation. The manual included detailed instructions for conducting inspections, preparing repair materials, coordinating with other craft guilds, and maintaining accurate records of all work performed. The inspection procedures outlined in the manual specified the tools and materials required for thorough bridge examination, including various types of measuring devices, probes for testing mortar consistency, and optical aids for examining hard-to-reach areas of bridge structures. The manual described seasonal variations in inspection requirements, noting that certain types of damage were more easily detected during specific weather conditions or times of year. Spring inspections, for example, were particularly important for identifying damage caused by winter ice formation, while autumn surveys focused on detecting erosion and settlement that might have occurred during the summer flood season. The material preparation sections of the manual provided detailed instructions for selecting, testing, and preparing the various substances used in bridge construction and repair. These instructions included traditional knowledge about stone selection, with specific criteria for evaluating the suitability of different types of rock for different structural applications. The manual described how to test stone hardness, porosity, and resistance to weathering, using techniques that had been developed through generations of practical experience. The mortar preparation instructions were particularly detailed, reflecting the critical importance of this material in bridge construction. The manual specified the proportions of lime, sand, and water required for different applications, along with detailed descriptions of mixing techniques and curing procedures. Different formulations were recommended for different seasons, with adjustments made to account for temperature and humidity variations that affected the setting and hardening of mortar joints. As the afternoon light filtering through the Guildhall windows gradually softened, Master Willem would carefully clean his writing implements, arranging them with the same methodical precision that characterized all aspects of his work. The quill pens were cleaned and resharpened, the ink bottles sealed with wax plugs to prevent evaporation, and the completed pages left to dry completely before being stored in the wooden chests that housed the Guild's growing collection of technical documents. The wooden storage chests themselves represented examples of specialized craftsmanship, constructed by the Guild of Cabinet Makers according to specifications designed to protect the valuable records from moisture, insects, and accidental damage. Each chest was lined with wool felt treated with aromatic herbs that deterred moths and other pests, while the exterior surfaces were finished with multiple coats of oil and wax that created effective barriers against humidity and temperature fluctuations. The daily routine of record keeping continued throughout the changing seasons, with Master Willem adapting his procedures to accommodate the practical constraints imposed by weather, daylight availability, and the seasonal rhythms of construction work. During the short days of winter, when outdoor bridge inspections were limited by reduced visibility and harsh weather conditions, the focus shifted to indoor activities, such as copying and organizing existing records, preparing materials for the coming construction season, and training new apprentices in the Guild's documentation procedures. The apprentice training program developed by Master Willem included both theoretical instruction and practical exercises designed to familiarize new record keepers with all aspects of the documentation system. Apprentices began by learning to prepare writing materials, including the cutting and shaping of quill pens, the preparation of various types of ink, and the proper care and storage of parchment and paper. They practiced basic writing techniques until they could produce clear, consistent letter forms that met the Guild's standards for legibility and aesthetic appearance. Advanced training involved learning to recognize and describe different types of stone mortar and structural elements commonly found in bridge construction. Apprentices studied examples of various deterioration patterns, learning to distinguish between different types of damage and to assess their severity and urgency. They practiced using the Guild's notation systems, creating sample records under Master Willem's supervision until they could produce documentation that met the established standards for accuracy and completeness. The seasonal cycle of bridge maintenance work created natural rhythms in the record-keeping process, with certain types of documentation activities concentrated during specific periods of the year. Spring brought intensive inspection schedules as Master Willem and his assistants examined every bridge in their territory for winter damage. The resulting documentation from these spring surveys formed the basis for planning repair work throughout the remainder of the year. Summer represented the peak season for actual construction and repair work, requiring detailed daily documentation of work progress, material consumption, and quality control observations. The summer records captured the immediate details of construction activities, while they were fresh in the minds of the craftsmen involved, ensuring that important technical knowledge would not be lost over time. Autumn inspections focused on preparing bridges for the challenges of winter weather, with particular attention paid to drainage systems, protective coatings, and structural elements that might be vulnerable to ice damage. The autumn records documented preventive maintenance activities designed to minimize winter damage and reduce the need for emergency repairs during the difficult months ahead. Winter brought opportunities for reflection and analysis, as Master Willem used the quiet months to review the year's accumulated records, identify patterns and trends, and prepare recommendations for improvements in construction techniques and maintenance procedures. The winter records included analytical summaries that synthesized months of detailed observations into broader conclusions about bridge performance and durability. The gradual accumulation of these seasonal records, year after year, created an unprecedented repository of technical knowledge about bridge construction and maintenance. The Guild's archives grew to include detailed information about hundreds of individual structures, along with systematic analyses of construction materials, environmental effects, and long-term performance patterns. As the years passed and the documentation system matured, the records themselves became valuable resources for training new craftsmen and for planning increasingly ambitious construction projects. Master Willem's systematic approach to recording technical information had created a foundation of knowledge that would influence bridge construction practices throughout the region for generations to come. with each carefully recorded observation contributing to the gradual refinement of engineering practices and construction standards that would eventually transform the infrastructure of medieval Europe.
Inventory scrolls of Abbey candle supplies, circa 1080 CE. The surprisingly detailed candle inventories of medieval monks and their meticulous record-keeping practices. Brother Aldrich of Cluny possessed hands that bore the permanent stains of beeswax and tallow, evidence of his 17 years serving as the abbey's keeper of illumination, a position that required him to maintain detailed inventories of every candle, wick, and measure of wax that entered or departed the monastery's carefully organised stores. The stone chamber that housed these supplies, located beneath the scriptorium where the copying of sacred texts required steady sources of light throughout the long winter months, contained shelves carved directly into the thick walls, each shelf bearing wooden markers inscribed with symbols that indicated the specific types and quantities of candles stored in that particular location. The inventory system that Brother Aldrich had inherited from his predecessor, the venerable Brother Godehard, who had served in this capacity for nearly 3 decades before his peaceful death during the feast of St. Benedict, was based upon a series of parchment scrolls prepared from sheepskins that had been carefully cleaned, stretched, and treated with lime solutions to create smooth writing surfaces. These scrolls, each measuring approximately 4 feet in length when fully unrolled, were stored in wooden cylinders crafted from seasoned oak and fitted with leather caps that protected the precious records from moisture and accidental damage. The preparation of new inventory scrolls followed procedures that had been refined over generations of monastic practice, beginning with the selection of appropriate sheepskins from animals that had been raised on the abbey's own lands and slaughtered according to the seasonal requirements of the monastery's food production schedule. The skins were soaked in wooden vats filled with water and lime for periods ranging from 8 to 12 days, depending upon the thickness of the hide and the ambient temperature of the preparation chamber. During this soaking period, the skins were stirred daily using wooden paddles carved from beechwood, a practice that ensured even treatment and prevented the formation of permanent wrinkles or weak spots in the finished parchment. After the initial soaking period, the skins were transferred to wooden frames where they were stretched taut using a system of ropes and wooden pegs that allowed for gradual adjustment of tension as the parchment dried. The stretching process required careful attention to maintain even tension across the entire surface of the skin, as uneven drying could result in areas of varying thickness that would affect the quality of writing surfaces. Brother Aldrich had learned to recognise the subtle changes in appearance and texture that indicated when the parchment had reached optimal dryness for removal from the stretching frames. The finished parchment was then cut into standardised sizes using sharp knives maintained specifically for this purpose, with the cutting performed on wooden tables whose surfaces had been worn smooth by decades of similar work. The standard scroll size used for candle inventories measured exactly 48 inches in length and 12 inches in width, dimensions that had been established through practical experience to provide adequate space for detailed records while remaining manageable for daily use in the confined spaces of the storage chambers. The ink used for recording inventory information was prepared according to a formula that Brother Aldrich had memorised during his early years of training under Brother Godehard's patient instruction. The basic ingredients included oak galls collected from specific varieties of oak trees that grew in the abbey's forest lands, iron sulphate obtained through trade with merchants who specialised in materials needed for manuscript production, gum arabic imported from distant lands at considerable expense, and water drawn from the abbey's deepest well, which was known to remain clear and sweet throughout all seasons of the year. The preparation of ink began with the careful grinding of oak galls using a stone mortar and pestle that had been carved from a single piece of granite and polished smooth through generations of use. The galls were ground to a fine powder that was then mixed with measured quantities of water and allowed to steep for periods ranging from 3 to 7 days, depending upon the desired intensity of the final ink colour. During the steeping period, the mixture was stirred twice daily using wooden implements carved specifically for this purpose, and the container was covered with linen cloth to prevent contamination while allowing for proper circulation of air. The iron sulfate was dissolved separately in a small quantity of warm water, with the proportions carefully measured using bronze scales that had been calibrated against standard weights maintained by the abbey's treasurer. The dissolved iron sulfate was then added to the oak gall mixture in small increments with constant stirring to ensure even distribution and prevent the formation of lumps or precipitates that could clog the writing instruments or create inconsistencies in the finished records. The addition of gum arabic, which served as a binding agent to help the ink adhere properly to the parchment surface, required particular care in measurement and mixing. The gum arabic was first dissolved in a small quantity of warm water, creating a solution that was strained through fine linen cloth to remove any impurities or undissolved particles. This solution was then added to the ink mixture in carefully measured portions, with thorough mixing between each addition to ensure proper integration of all components. The finished ink was tested on small scraps of parchment to ensure proper flow characteristics and colour intensity before being transferred to the ceramic ink pots, used for daily record-keeping activities. These ink pots, crafted by the Abbey's own pottery workshop, were designed with narrow openings that minimised evaporation while providing easy access for writing instruments. Each pot was fitted with a wooden stopper carved to fit precisely into the opening, creating an airtight seal that preserved the ink's quality during periods when it was not in active use. The writing instruments used for inventory records consisted primarily of goose quill pens, prepared according to traditional methods that Brother Aldrich had learned during his novitiate training. The selection of appropriate feathers required careful attention to the age and condition of the geese, with preference given to feathers from the left wing of birds that had reached maturity during the previous autumn. These feathers were cleaned and prepared through a process that involved careful removal of the natural oils and membrane materials, followed by hardening treatments using heated sand or ash to create durable writing points. The cutting of quill points required considerable skill and experience, as the angle and shape of the cut determined the width and consistency of the written lines. Brother Aldrich used a sharp knife with a curved blade specifically designed for this purpose, making precise cuts that created points suitable for the fine lettering required in inventory records. The finished quills were stored in wooden boxes lined with soft wool to protect the delicate points from damage during storage and transport. The inventory recording process began each morning after the completion of Lauds, when Brother Aldrich would collect his writing materials and proceed to the candle storage chambers to conduct his daily examination of supplies and record any changes that had occurred since the previous day's inspection. The examination process followed a systematic routine that ensured complete coverage of all storage areas and accurate documentation of all relevant information. The storage chambers were organised according to a classification system that divided candles into categories based upon their size, composition, and intended use within the Abbey's religious and practical activities. The largest category consisted of altar candles used during the celebration of Mass and other liturgical ceremonies, with subcategories for different sizes and qualities of candles required for various types of services. These candles were stored on the uppermost shelves of the storage chambers, where they remained easily accessible while being protected from moisture and temperature fluctuations that might affect their burning characteristics. The altar candles themselves were crafted from the finest available beeswax, obtained through the Abbey's own beekeeping operations, as well as through trade relationships with other monastic communities known for the quality of their honey and wax production. The beeswax was purified through a careful process of heating and filtering that removed impurities and created a uniform consistency suitable for candle making. The purification process required multiple stages of heating and cooling, with careful attention to temperature control, to prevent scorching or other damage that might affect the quality of the finished candles. The wicks used in altar candles were prepared from linen threads that had been twisted and treated with special preparations designed to ensure steady, even burning without excessive smoking or flickering. The linen threads were obtained from the abbey's own textile production facilities, where flax grown on monastic lands was processed into various grades of thread and cloth. The highest quality linen threads were reserved for wick production, with careful selection based upon fibre length, consistency, and freedom from knots or weak spots that might cause irregular burning. The preparation of wicks involved a multi-stage process that began with the careful selection and preparation of individual linen threads. The selected threads were then twisted together using techniques that created uniform thickness throughout the length of each wick, with the degree of twist calibrated to provide optimal burning characteristics for different sizes and types of candles. The twisted wicks were then treated with solutions of salt and other substances that helped control the rate of burning and reduce the tendency for excessive smoking or guttering. The second major category of candles in Brother Aldrich's inventory consisted of what were termed utility candles, used for general illumination throughout the abbey's various chambers and work areas. These candles were typically made from tallow, a less expensive material obtained from the fat of cattle and sheep raised on the abbey's lands or acquired through trade with local farmers and merchants. The preparation of tallow for candle making required careful rendering and purification processes that removed impurities and created a material suitable for forming into candles. The rendering process began with the collection and preparation of animal fat, which was cut into small pieces and heated slowly in large iron cauldrons maintained specifically for this purpose. The heating process required careful temperature control to ensure complete melting without scorching, as overheated tallow developed unpleasant odours and poor burning characteristics. During the rendering process, the melted fat was stirred regularly, using wooden implements to ensure even heating and prevent the formation of lumps or inconsistencies. The purified tallow was then strained through layers of linen cloth to remove any remaining solid particles or impurities that might affect the quality of the finished candles. The straining process was repeated multiple times with progressively finer grades of cloth used to achieve the level of purity required for different types of candles. The highest quality tallow, reserved for candles used in important areas of the abbey, underwent additional purification steps that included washing with clean water and treatment with salt solutions. The actual formation of candles from prepared wax or tallow followed traditional methods that had been practiced in monastic communities for generations. The most common technique involved the repeated dipping of prepared wicks into containers of melted wax or tallow, with each dip adding a thin layer of material that gradually built up to form candles of the desired thickness. The dipping process required careful attention to temperature control, as wax or tallow that was too hot would not adhere properly to previous layers, while material that was too cool would create rough, uneven surfaces. Between each dip, the forming candles were allowed to cool and harden sufficiently to support additional layers without deformation. The cooling process was facilitated by hanging the candles from wooden frames constructed specifically for this purpose, with careful spacing to prevent the candles from touching each other during the cooling period. The entire dipping and cooling cycle was repeated multiple times until candles of the desired diameter were achieved. Brother Aldrich's inventory records documented not only the quantities of finished candles in storage, but also the amounts of raw materials available for candle production, including stores of beeswax, tallow, linen thread for wicks, and various other supplies needed for the candle-making process. The documentation of raw materials followed the same systematic approach used for finished products, with detailed categories and subcategories that allowed for precise tracking of material consumption and production planning. The beeswax inventory included separate entries for different grades of wax, classified according to colour, purity, and source. The highest grade consisted of light-coloured wax obtained from newly constructed honeycomb, which produced candles with minimal smoke and pleasant, subtle fragrance. Lower grades included darker wax from older combs and wax that had been contaminated with honey or other substances during the extraction process. Each grade of wax was stored separately and used for appropriate types of candles based upon the intended application and the standards required for different liturgical and practical uses. The tallow inventory was organised according to the source animal and the degree of purification that had been applied during rendering. Beef tallow, obtained from cattle, was generally preferred for larger candles due to its superior burning characteristics and lower tendency to produce excessive smoke. Sheep tallow, while less expensive and more readily available, was typically reserved for smaller candles used in areas where smoking was less of a concern. The inventory records noted the age of stored tallow, as this material could deteriorate over time and develop rancid odours that made it unsuitable for use in candles. The wick material inventory included detailed records of linen thread quantities, organised by thickness and quality grade. The finest threads, suitable for altar candles, were stored separately from coarser materials used in utility candles. The inventory also included records of prepared wicks that had been cut to appropriate lengths and treated with salt solutions, ready for immediate use in candle production. These prepared wicks were stored in wooden boxes designed to protect them from moisture and contamination, while allowing easy access during candle-making activities. The daily inventory process involved the systematic examination of each storage area, with Brother Aldrich carefully counting and recording the quantities of all materials and finished products. The counting process followed established procedures designed to ensure accuracy and consistency, with items arranged in standard groupings that facilitated rapid and accurate enumeration. Candles were typically grouped in bundles of 12, a quantity that had proven convenient for both storage and distribution purposes. The recording of inventory information followed standardized formats that had been developed over years of practical experience. Each entry included the date of the inventory, expressed according to the liturgical calendar, followed by detailed descriptions of the items being recorded. The descriptions included information about size, composition, quality grade, and storage location, along with any observations about condition or factors that might affect future usability. Changes in inventory levels were documented with particular care, as these changes provided important information for planning future production activities and managing the Abbey's overall supply requirements. Increases in inventory, typically resulting from completed production activities, were recorded with details about the production process, including the quantities of raw materials consumed and any observations about the quality of the finished products. Decreases in inventory, resulting from distribution of candles for use throughout the Abbey, were recorded with information about the intended use and the individuals or departments receiving the materials. The seasonal variations in candle consumption required careful planning and documentation to ensure adequate supplies throughout the year. During the winter months, when daylight hours were shortened and additional illumination was needed for extended periods, candle consumption increased significantly. The inventory records from these periods show detailed tracking of usage patterns, with particular attention to the types and quantities of candles required for different activities and areas of the Abbey. The preparation for major religious festivals and ceremonies required special attention to candle supplies, as these occasions often involve the use of larger quantities of higher quality candles than were needed for routine daily activities. Brother Aldrich's records show careful planning for events such as Christmas, Easter, and various saints' feast days, with advanced preparation of special candles and detailed scheduling of production activities to ensure adequate supplies without waste. The quality control aspects of candle inventory management involved regular testing and evaluation of stored materials to ensure that they maintained acceptable characteristics throughout their storage period. Candles were examined for signs of deterioration, such as surface discoloration, cracking, or the development of rancid odours that might affect their suitability for use. Materials showing signs of deterioration were either used quickly for less critical applications or removed from inventory to prevent contamination of higher quality supplies. The testing procedures included burning small samples of candles from each batch to evaluate their burning characteristics, including flame stability, smoke production, and overall burn time. These tests were conducted in controlled conditions that allowed for accurate observation and documentation of performance characteristics. The results of these tests were recorded in special sections of the inventory scrolls, providing long-term records of quality trends and production consistency. The storage conditions in the candle chambers required constant monitoring and adjustment to maintain optimal preservation of both raw materials and finished products. The stone chambers provided natural insulation against temperature fluctuations, but additional measures were necessary to control humidity and prevent contamination from insects or other pests. Brother Aldrich's records document the various techniques used to maintain proper storage conditions, including the use of aromatic herbs to deter insects and the installation of ventilation systems that provided air circulation without exposing stored materials to excessive moisture. The wooden shelving systems used for candle storage were constructed according to specifications that had been refined through generations of practical experience. The shelves were spaced to provide adequate air circulation around stored materials, while maximizing the efficient use of available storage space. The wood used in shelf construction was carefully selected and treated to resist moisture and insect damage, with regular maintenance and replacement schedules documented in the inventory records. As the seasons progressed and Brother Aldrich continued his daily rounds of inventory management, the accumulated records began to reveal patterns and trends that provided valuable insights into the Abbey's candle consumption and production requirements. The long-term records showed seasonal variations in usage, the relationship between weather conditions and candle consumption, and the effectiveness of different storage and preservation techniques. The winter records, in particular, demonstrated the increased complexity of inventory management during the periods of highest candle consumption, when daily usage could exceed normal levels by factors of 2 or 3. These periods required careful rationing of higher quality candles and increased production of utility candles to meet basic illumination needs throughout the Abbey's extensive facilities. During the quiet afternoon hours, when the scriptorium fell silent and the copying of manuscripts ceased until the following day, Brother Aldrich would often spend time organising and reviewing his accumulated inventory records, looking for opportunities to improve efficiency and reduce waste in the Abbey's candle management systems. These review sessions led to gradual refinements in storage procedures, production scheduling, and quality control measures that helped optimize the use of available resources. Standardizing grain weights in Carolingian market halls. Why measuring grain in the 9th century was so complicated and required extensive bureaucratic oversight. The stone halls of Aachen Central Marketplace echoed with the gentle scraping of bronze weights against wooden measuring bowls during the autumn harvest season of 847, when Count Adalbert, the measurer, whose official title within Charlemagne's administrative system was Supervisor of Commercial Standards, for the Eastern Frankish territories, began implementing the comprehensive grain measurement reforms that would eventually transform trade practices throughout the Carolingian Empire. The reforms addressed the increasingly complex problems created by the proliferation of local measurement systems, each tied to regional traditions and varying interpretations of what constituted standard quantities for different types of grain. The measuring system that Count Adalbert inherited upon his appointment to this position 3 years earlier consisted of an bewildering array of local standards, each claiming legitimacy based upon traditions stretching back through generations of merchant families and regional authorities. In the territory surrounding Aachen alone, no fewer than 17 different measurement standards were in regular use, ranging from the heavy modius used by wheat merchants from the Rhine Valley to the lighter cestarius preferred by barley traders from the more mountainous regions to the east. The bronze weights used in these various systems had been crafted by local metal workers according to specifications that varied not only between regions, but often between individual market towns within the same administrative district. The variations arose from differences in the bronze alloys used, the precision of the casting techniques employed, and most significantly, the lack of authoritative reference standards that could serve as the basis for creating uniform weights throughout the empire. Count Adalbert's first step in addressing these inconsistencies involved the establishment of a master workshop within the imperial palace complex at Aachen, where skilled craftsmen worked under direct supervision to create a definitive set of reference weights that would serve as the foundation for all future measurement standardization efforts. The workshop occupied a stone building specifically constructed for this purpose, with thick walls that provided insulation against temperature fluctuations that might affect the precision of metalworking operations. The craftsmen selected for this project were drawn from the most respected metalworking guilds throughout the empire, chosen not only for their technical skills, but also for their demonstrated ability to work with the consistency and precision required for creating measurement standards. The workshop's master craftsman, one Einhard the Precise, whose family had served imperial projects for 3 generations, supervised the creation of bronze alloys according to formulas that had been refined through extensive experimentation with different combinations of copper, tin, and trace metals. The bronze alloy used for the reference weights consisted of approximately 88 parts copper to 12 parts tin, with small additions of lead and zinc that improved the flow characteristics of the molten metal during casting operations. The precise proportions were determined through systematic testing of samples cast with different compositions, evaluating each alloy for durability, resistance to corrosion, and consistency of density throughout cast objects. The copper used in these alloys was obtained from mines in the Harz Mountains, selected for its high purity and consistent characteristics. The ore was smelted using charcoal produced from oak trees that had been carefully seasoned for 2 full years to ensure consistent burning properties. The smelting process took place in furnaces designed specifically for this project, with careful temperature control achieved through the use of bellows systems operated by teams of workers trained in the precise timing and pressure variations required for optimal metal quality. The tin component of the alloy was imported from sources in Cornwall, transported across the continent through a complex network of merchant relationships that Count Adalbert had spent months establishing. The quality of this tin was verified through testing procedures that involved casting small sample ingots and evaluating their consistency, purity, and working characteristics. Only tin that met the established standards was approved for use in the reference weight project. The casting process for the reference weights followed procedures that had been carefully documented to ensure reproducibility and consistency across all weights in the system. The casting moulds were carved from fine-grained stone, obtained from quarries near Paris, selected for its homogeneous structure and resistance to thermal shock during the casting process. Each mould was carved with extreme precision, using tools specifically designed for this purpose, with dimensional accuracy verified using measuring devices calibrated against length standards maintained in the Imperial Treasury. The actual casting operations were performed during the early morning hours, when atmospheric conditions were most stable, minimizing the effects of temperature and humidity variations on the cooling and solidification of the cast metal. The molten bronze was poured into the moulds using ladles designed to minimize turbulence and air entrapment, which could create voids or density variations in the finished weights. After casting, each weight underwent a careful finishing process that involved filing, grinding, and polishing to achieve the exact dimensions and surface characteristics specified in the project requirements. The finishing work was performed using tools and techniques that had been standardized to ensure consistent results across all weights in the system. The precision of the finished weights was verified using balance scales constructed specifically for this purpose, with sensitivity levels that allowed detection of variations smaller than those that would affect practical trade measurements. The reference weight system developed at Aachen consisted of 5 primary denominations, each related to the others through carefully calculated ratios that reflected both mathematical convenience and practical utility in commercial transactions. The largest weight, designated the major modius, corresponded to the quantity of wheat that could be carried by a single man without undue strain, approximately equivalent to modern measurements of 35 pounds. The remaining weights in the system represented fractions of this base unit, calculated according to a binary progression that facilitated rapid mental calculations during trade negotiations. The second weight in the system, termed the medius modius, represented exactly half the quantity of the major modius, while the third weight, called the minor modius, represented 1/4 of the base unit. The two smallest weights, designated respectively as the major denarius and the minor denarius, represented 1/8 and 1/16 of the major modius, providing merchants with the ability to measure small quantities with the same precision applied to larger transactions. The implementation of this standardized weight system required the training of measuring officials throughout the empire, individuals who would be responsible for verifying the accuracy of weights used in local markets and ensuring compliance with the new standards. Count Adalbert established a comprehensive training program that brought measuring officials from throughout the Carolingian territories to Aachen for intensive instruction in the proper use and maintenance of the standardized weights. The training program extended over a period of 4 weeks, during which the officials learned not only the technical aspects of weight verification, but also the administrative procedures required for documenting compliance and reporting violations of the measurement standards. The curriculum included detailed instruction in the proper care and storage of bronze weights, recognition of signs of wear or damage that might affect accuracy, and techniques for detecting fraudulent weights that might be introduced by dishonest merchants. The verification procedures taught during these training sessions involved the use of specially constructed balance scales that had been calibrated against the master reference weights maintained at Aachen. These scales were designed with sensitivity levels that allowed detection of discrepancies as small as 1 part in 500, providing officials with the ability to identify even minor deviations from the established standards. The administrative aspects of the training program covered the documentation requirements for weight inspections, including the preparation of written reports that describe the condition and accuracy of weights examined, the identity of merchants whose weights were found to be non-compliant, and recommendations for corrective actions or penalties. The reports were prepared using standardized forms written in Latin, ensuring consistency in documentation across the diverse linguistic regions of the empire. The distribution of certified weights to market towns throughout the empire required the establishment of a complex logistics system that could deliver the bronze weights safely and efficiently across the extensive transportation networks of the time. Count Adalbert organised this distribution effort through partnerships with merchant guilds and monastic communities that maintained regular travel schedules between major population centres. Each set of weights destined for a particular market town was packaged in specially constructed wooden cases lined with wool padding to protect against damage during transport. The cases were sealed with lead seals bearing official markings that authenticated their contents and provided evidence of tampering if the seals were broken during transit. Detailed inventory lists accompanied each shipment, documenting the specific weights included and their verified accuracy measurements. The transportation of these weight sets was coordinated with existing trade routes and messenger services, minimizing the additional costs and complexity associated with establishing dedicated distribution systems. Monasteries along the major routes provided secure storage for weight shipments during extended journeys, while merchant caravans offered protection and reliable transport schedules that ensured timely delivery to destination markets. Upon arrival at each market town, the certified weight sets were formally presented to local authorities through ceremonies that emphasized the importance of the standardization effort and the legal requirements for compliance with the new measurement system. These ceremonies typically included demonstrations of the proper use of the weights, explanation of the penalties for non-compliance, and the appointment of local officials responsible for ongoing oversight of measurement practices. The local officials appointed to oversee measurement compliance were typically drawn from the ranks of established merchants or craft guild leaders who possessed both the technical knowledge required for weight verification and the social standing necessary to enforce compliance among their peers. These officials received copies of the standardized procedures developed during the training program at Aachen, along with detailed instructions for reporting violations and requesting assistance from imperial authorities when needed. The enforcement of measurement standards involved regular inspections of merchant activities, with particular attention paid to grain traders whose transactions represented the largest volume of commercial activity in most market towns. The inspection process involved the comparison of merchants' weights against the certified reference weights using balance scales and verification procedures identical to those taught during the training program at Aachen. Merchants found to be using non-compliant weights faced penalties that ranged from fines and temporary trading suspensions to permanent banishment from market activities, depending upon the severity of the violations and evidence of intentional fraud. The penalty system was designed to provide strong incentives for voluntary compliance while maintaining proportionality between violations and consequences. The documentation of inspection results and enforcement actions created an extensive archive of records that provided Count Adalbert and his staff with detailed information about compliance patterns, regional variations in merchant behaviour, and the effectiveness of different enforcement strategies. These records were compiled into periodic reports that were submitted to imperial authorities and used to refine and improve the standardization program over time. The seasonal variations in grain trade created particular challenges for the measurement standardization efforts, as different types of grain required different handling techniques and presented varying degrees of difficulty in achieving accurate measurements. Wheat, being relatively dense and uniform in size, could be measured with high precision using standard procedures, while oats and barley, with their lower densities and more irregular shapes, required modifications to the basic measurement techniques. The standardization program addressed these variations through the development of correction factors that allowed merchants to convert between measurements of different grain types using the same basic weight system. These correction factors were based upon extensive testing and measurement of various grain samples, with the results compiled into reference tables that were distributed to measuring officials throughout the empire. The reference tables included detailed instructions for applying the correction factors, along with guidelines for recognizing situations where the standard corrections might not be applicable due to unusual characteristics of particular grain samples. The tables also provided information about seasonal variations in grain density and moisture content that could affect measurement accuracy, helping officials to adjust their procedures according to prevailing conditions. The training of merchants in the proper use of the standardized weights involved ongoing educational efforts that extended well beyond the initial implementation period. Count Adalbert established a system of regional workshops where experienced measuring officials provided instruction to merchants who were new to standardized measurement practices or who required refresher training to maintain their proficiency. These workshops covered both the technical aspects of weight usage and the business benefits of standardized measurements, emphasizing how consistent measurement practices could reduce disputes, improve customer confidence, and facilitate trade relationships between merchants from different regions. The curriculum included practical exercises where merchants practiced measuring various types of grain under different conditions, developing the skills and confidence needed for accurate measurements in real-world trading situations. The record-keeping requirements associated with standardized measurements created new administrative burdens for merchants who were required to maintain detailed logs of their trading activities and make these records available for inspection by measuring officials. The standardization program provided merchants with template record-keeping systems that simplified compliance while ensuring that the information needed for oversight purposes was properly documented. The record-keeping templates included spaces for recording the date and location of each transaction, the type and quantity of grain involved, the names of the parties to the transaction, and certification that standardized weights were used for all measurements. Merchants were also required to note any unusual circumstances that might have affected measurement accuracy, such as extreme weather conditions or irregularities in grain quality. The accumulation of transaction records throughout the empire created an unprecedented database of commercial activity that provided imperial administrators with detailed insights into trade patterns, seasonal variations in grain production and consumption, and the economic relationships between different regions of the empire. This information was used to inform policy decisions about taxation, transportation infrastructure, and agricultural development programs. The analysis of transaction records also revealed patterns of non-compliance and fraud that helped enforcement officials to target their oversight efforts more effectively. Merchants or regions showing unusual patterns in their reported measurements received increased attention from measuring officials, while areas with consistently accurate measurements were recognized for their compliance and used as models for other regions. The long-term success of the grain measurement standardization program depended upon the establishment of maintenance and calibration procedures that ensured the continued accuracy of weights used throughout the empire. Count Adalbert developed a system of periodic recalibration that required measuring officials to return their reference weights to regional centers for comparison against master standards maintained at those locations. The recalibration process involved the careful measurement and documentation of any deviations from the original specifications, followed by corrective actions that might include adjustment, repair, or replacement of weights that had drifted beyond acceptable tolerances. The frequency of recalibration was determined based upon the usage patterns and environmental conditions in each region, with weights used in high-volume markets requiring more frequent attention than those used in smaller, less active trading centres. The regional calibration centres were established in major administrative centres throughout the empire, each equipped with master reference weights that were periodically verified against the original standards maintained at Aachen. This hierarchical calibration system ensured that measurement accuracy was maintained throughout the empire while minimizing the logistical complexity and costs associated with centralized calibration procedures. As the winter months approached and grain trading activity declined to seasonal lows, measuring officials throughout the empire turned their attention to the maintenance and preparation activities that would ensure smooth operation of the measurement system during the following year's trading season. The winter maintenance programs included detailed cleaning and inspection of all weights and measuring equipment, repair or replacement of worn or damaged items, and preparation of new documentation and record-keeping materials for the coming year. The cleaning procedures for bronze weights involved the careful removal of accumulated dirt, corrosion, and other deposits that might affect weight accuracy or appearance. The cleaning was performed using soft brushes and mild abrasive compounds that removed surface contamination without damaging the underlying metal or altering the precise dimensions of the weights. During these quiet winter months, experienced measuring officials also conducted training sessions for apprentices and newly appointed officials, passing on the knowledge and skills that had been accumulated through years of practical experience with the standardized measurement system. These informal training sessions supplemented the formal training programs conducted at Aachen, providing opportunities for detailed discussion of practical problems and solutions that had been developed through real-world application of the measurement standards. The Ink Regulation Edicts of 13th century Genoa, a sleepy story about medieval ink rules and office supplies in the bustling maritime republic. The morning bells of San Lorenzo Cathedral had barely finished echoing across the narrow streets of Genoa when Maestro Giovanni di Camogli, the recently appointed supervisor of scribal materials for the Republic's expanding bureaucracy, unlocked the heavy wooden doors of his workshop, located in the Via del Campo, just 3 buildings down from the Guildhall of the Notaries, who would soon become the primary consumers of the standardized inks and writing materials that formed the subject of the comprehensive regulations issued by the Council of Ancients during the spring of 1247. The regulations, formally titled the Ordinamenta de Inchiostris et Materiis Scribendi, had been drafted in response to the growing complexity of Genoa's commercial and administrative documentation requirements, which had expanded dramatically as the city's maritime trade networks reached increasingly distant ports throughout the Mediterranean and beyond, into the Atlantic territories, recently opened to Genoese merchants and banking houses. The proliferation of different ink formulations and qualities throughout the city's numerous scriptoria had created significant problems for document authentication and long-term preservation, as contracts and official records prepared with inferior or unstable inks began showing signs of fading, discoloration, and illegibility within just a few years of their creation. The situation had become particularly acute in the offices of the customs authorities, where merchant contracts written with substandard inks had become unreadable, leading to disputes over cargo duties and trade privileges that threatened to undermine confidence in Genoa's commercial legal system. Maestro Giovanni's appointment to address these issues reflected his reputation as one of the most knowledgeable practitioners of ink preparation in northern Italy, having learned his craft during a 7-year apprenticeship with the monks of San Frutuoso, who had maintained their own scriptorium for over 2 centuries, and had developed particularly sophisticated techniques for creating inks that remained stable and legible, even under the challenging conditions of high humidity and salt air that characterized the coastal environment. The workshop that served as both Maestro Giovanni's base of operations and the testing laboratory for implementing the new regulations occupied the ground floor of a stone building that had previously housed a spice merchant's storage facility. The conversion of the space to ink production had required extensive modifications, including the installation of specialized ventilation systems designed to safely handle the fumes produced during various stages of ink preparation, and the construction of stone-lined vats and containers needed for the chemical processes involved in creating high-quality writing materials. The ventilation system consisted of a series of wooden ducts that carried fumes from the work areas to openings high in the exterior walls,
with carefully positioned baffles that prevented rain and wind from entering, while allowing for continuous air circulation. The design of this system had been based upon similar installations in the city's established metalworking and dyeing industries, adapted to meet the specific requirements of ink production through consultation with craftsmen experienced in handling the particular chemicals and processes involved. The stone-lined containers were carved from blocks of local marble that had been selected for their density and resistance to chemical attack from the various acids and alkalis used in ink preparation. Each container was fitted with wooden covers designed to minimize evaporation and prevent contamination from dust and other airborne particles that might affect the quality of the finished products. The containers were arranged according to a systematic layout that facilitated the efficient movement of materials through the various stages of processing, while maintaining separation between incompatible chemicals. The primary regulation addressed by the new edicts concerned the standardization of black ink formulations used for official documents and commercial contracts. The traditional iron gall ink that had been used throughout Europe for centuries was known to be highly variable in quality, depending upon the sources and preparation methods used for its key components, particularly the oak galls that provided the tannins essential for creating the chemical reactions that produced the ink's distinctive color and permanence characteristics. The standardization process began with the establishment of approved sources for oak galls, based upon extensive testing of materials obtained from different geographical regions and tree species. The testing involved the preparation of sample inks using identical procedures, except for the source of galls, followed by systematic evaluation of color intensity, flow characteristics, permanence when exposed to light and moisture, and compatibility with different types of parchment and paper. The oak galls approved for use in regulated ink production were primarily obtained from a specific species of oak tree that grew in the hills surrounding the city of Pisa, where particular climatic conditions and soil characteristics produced galls with consistently high tannin content and minimal contamination from other substances that might affect ink quality. The harvesting of these galls was regulated through contracts with local suppliers, who agreed to follow specific collection procedures designed to ensure optimal material quality. The collection procedures specified that galls should be harvested only during certain months of the year when tannin concentrations reached their peak levels, typically during the late summer and early autumn, when the insect larvae that created the galls had completed their development, but before weather conditions began to cause deterioration of the gall structures. The collectors were required to select only galls that met specific criteria for size, weight, color and freedom from cracks or other damage that might indicate internal decay. After collection, the approved galls underwent a carefully controlled drying process that removed excess moisture while preserving the chemical compounds essential for ink production. The drying took place in covered wooden structures that protected the galls from direct sunlight and rainfall, while allowing for adequate air circulation. The duration of the drying process varied depending upon ambient temperature and humidity conditions, but typically required between 4 and 6 weeks to achieve the moisture content specified in the regulations. The preparation of oak galls for ink production involved grinding the dried galls into powder, using stone mills designed specifically for this purpose. The grinding process required careful attention to achieve the particle size distribution that would provide optimal extraction of tannins while avoiding the production of excessively fine dust that might create handling problems or affect the flow characteristics of the finished ink. The stone mills used for gall grinding consisted of 2 circular stones, the upper stone rotating against the stationary lower stone, with the gap between the stones adjustable to control the fineness of the ground material. The stones were carved from a particular type of sandstone quarried near the town of Volterra, selected for its hardness and uniformity of grain structure. The grinding surfaces were periodically redressed using specialized tools to maintain optimal grinding characteristics and prevent contamination of the processed galls with stone particles. The ground oak galls were stored in sealed ceramic containers that protected them from moisture and contamination, while allowing for easy measurement and dispensing during ink preparation. Each container was labeled with information about the source of the galls, the date of processing, and test results that verified compliance with quality standards. The storage areas were maintained at consistent temperature and humidity levels to prevent deterioration of the processed materials. The second major component regulated under the new edicts was iron sulfate, known to medieval practitioners as copperas, which provided the ions necessary for the chemical reactions that created the permanent black color of iron gall ink. The quality and purity of iron sulfate varied significantly depending upon its source and preparation method, with impurities causing variations in color, stability, and compatibility with other ink components. The regulations specified that iron sulfate used in official ink production must be obtained from approved suppliers, who could demonstrate consistent quality and purity levels through chemical testing procedures. The testing involved the preparation of sample solutions with known concentrations of iron sulfate, followed by evaluation of color development when mixed with standard oak gall extracts, assessment of crystal structure and purity through visual examination, and measurement of solubility characteristics under various conditions. The approved iron sulfate suppliers were primarily located in regions where natural deposits of iron-bearing minerals could be processed using techniques that minimized contamination with other metals or chemical compounds. The processing typically involved the controlled oxidation of iron-containing ores in the presence of sulfuric acid solutions, followed by crystallization procedures that separated the desired iron sulfate from other reaction products. The crystallization process required careful control of temperature and concentration conditions to produce iron sulfate crystals with the size and purity characteristics specified in the regulations. The crystals were formed by slowly cooling saturated solutions of iron sulfate, allowing the gradual formation of well-developed crystal structures that could be easily separated from remaining liquid and impurities. The cooling process typically required several days to complete, with periodic monitoring to ensure optimal crystal development. The finished iron sulfate crystals were tested for purity using procedures that involved dissolving measured quantities in distilled water and evaluating the resulting solutions for color, clarity, and chemical reactivity. Solutions that met the established standards were clear and nearly colorless, with no visible precipitates or cloudiness that might indicate the presence of impurities. The chemical reactivity tests involved mixing the iron sulfate solutions with standard oak gall extracts, and observing the rate and intensity of color development. The third major component addressed in the ink regulations was gum arabic, which served as a binding agent that helped the ink adhere properly to writing surfaces while providing the proper flow characteristics for different types of writing instruments. The quality of gum arabic varied considerably depending upon its botanical source, geographical origin, and processing methods, with these variations significantly affecting the performance characteristics of the finished ink. The regulations specified that gum arabic used in official ink production must be obtained from specific species of acacia trees growing in approved regions of North Africa, where climatic conditions and harvesting practices produced gum with optimal chemical composition and physical properties. The approved sources were primarily located in areas that had been traditional suppliers to European markets for several centuries, with established trade relationships that ensured reliable quality and supply. The harvesting of gum arabic involved making controlled incisions in the bark of mature acacia trees, allowing the natural exudation of gum that would harden into translucent nodules suitable for collection. The timing and technique of the incisions were critical factors in determining the quality of the harvested gum, with procedures that had been refined through generations of experience among the collectors who specialized in this activity. The collection of hardened gum nodules required careful selection to ensure that only material meeting quality standards was included in shipments destined for ink production. The selection criteria included evaluation of color, transparency, freedom from bark fragments or other foreign matter, and hardness characteristics that indicated proper curing and chemical composition. The highest quality gum arabic appeared as clear, amber-colored nodules that were hard and brittle, breaking cleanly when subjected to moderate pressure. The processing of raw gum arabic for ink production involved several stages of cleaning, sorting, and preparation designed to remove impurities and create uniform particle sizes suitable for dissolution in water-based solutions. The cleaning process began with careful removal of any attached bark, sand or other foreign matter using soft brushes and gentle scraping techniques that avoided damage to the gum itself. After cleaning, the gum arabic was sorted according to size and quality grades, with the finest material reserved for the highest quality inks used in the most important official documents. The sorting process involved visual examination of each nodule, with classification based upon color uniformity, transparency, and freedom from cracks or other defects that might affect solubility or binding characteristics. The preparation of gum arabic solutions for ink production required careful attention to concentration levels and dissolution procedures that ensured complete incorporation of the gum without creating excessive viscosity or other flow problems. The dissolution process typically involved grinding the selected gum nodules into powder using techniques similar to those used for oak gall preparation, followed by gradual addition of the powdered gum to measured quantities of distilled water while stirring continuously to prevent the formation of lumps or undissolved particles. The water used in gum arabic preparation, as well as in all other stages of ink production, was subject to specific quality requirements outlined in the regulations. The approved water sources were limited to deep wells or springs that had been tested for mineral content, clarity, and freedom from contamination that might affect ink quality or stability. The testing procedures involved both chemical analysis and practical evaluation through the preparation of sample inks using water from different sources. The chemical analysis of water sources focused primarily on the detection of dissolved minerals that might interfere with the chemical reactions involved in ink formation, or cause precipitation or discoloration problems in the finished product. Particular attention was paid to the presence of calcium and magnesium compounds, which could react with other ink components to form insoluble precipitates, and iron compounds, which might cause unwanted color variations or affect the stability of the ink over time. The practical evaluation of water sources involved the preparation of standard ink formulations using water from each potential source, followed by systematic testing of the resulting inks for color development, flow characteristics, stability during storage, and performance when used with various types of writing instruments and surfaces. The testing procedures were designed to simulate the conditions under which the inks would be used in actual document preparation activities. The blending of the various components to create finished ink followed standardized procedures that specified precise proportions, mixing sequences, and processing conditions designed to ensure consistent quality and performance characteristics. The standard formulation for black ink used in official documents consisted of specific ratios of oak gall extract, iron sulfate solution, gum arabic solution, and approved water, with the exact proportions determined through extensive testing to optimize both immediate performance and long-term stability. The mixing process began with the preparation of separate solutions of each major component, using procedures and concentrations that had been established through the regulatory development process. The oak gall extract was prepared by steeping measured quantities of ground galls in hot water for specified periods, followed by filtration to remove solid particles and standardization of the extract concentration through dilution or concentration procedures. The iron sulfate solution was prepared by dissolving measured quantities of approved crystals in distilled water, with careful attention to achieving complete dissolution without excessive heating that might cause chemical decomposition, or the formation of unwanted reaction products. The concentration of the iron sulfate solution was verified through chemical testing procedures that ensured consistency between different batches of ink. The gum arabic solution was prepared using the procedures described earlier, with particular attention to achieving complete dissolution and uniform consistency throughout the solution. The concentration of the gum arabic solution was adjusted to provide optimal binding characteristics, while maintaining acceptable flow properties for different types of writing applications. The actual blending of the component solutions followed a specific sequence designed to promote optimal chemical reactions while minimizing the formation of precipitates or other undesirable products. The process typically began with the gradual addition of iron sulfate solution to the oak gall extract, with continuous stirring to ensure uniform mixing and promote the development of the characteristic black color through chemical reactions between the tannins and iron compounds. The gum Arabic solution was added after the initial color development reactions had proceeded to completion, typically requiring several hours of aging to achieve optimal color intensity and stability. The addition of gum Arabic was performed slowly and with continuous mixing to ensure uniform distribution throughout the ink without creating excessive viscosity or flow problems. The finished ink underwent final quality testing procedures that evaluated all aspects of performance and compliance with regulatory standards. The testing included evaluation of color intensity and uniformity, flow characteristics with different types of writing instruments, drying time and adhesion to various writing surfaces, and stability during storage under different environmental conditions. The color evaluation procedures involved comparison of sample writings with standardized color references that had been established during the regulatory development process. The comparisons were performed under controlled lighting conditions using techniques that minimized the effects of observer variations and environmental factors that might affect color perception. The flow characteristic testing involved the use of various types of writing instruments, including different grades of quill pens, reed pens, and the newly introduced metal-nibbed pens that were beginning to appear in some of the more advanced scriptoria. The testing evaluated the ease of writing, consistency of line thickness, and absence of skipping or other flow problems that might affect document quality. The stability testing involved the preparation of sample documents that were subjected to various environmental conditions designed to simulate the range of conditions under which official documents might be stored over extended periods. The testing included exposure to different temperature and humidity levels, various types of lighting conditions, and contact with different storage materials that might affect ink stability. As the regulatory system matured and became established throughout Genoa's administrative and commercial sectors, Maestro Giovanni began developing advanced formulations that addressed specific requirements for different types of documents and applications. These specialized inks included formulations optimized for use on different types of writing surfaces, inks with enhanced resistance to water damage for documents that might be exposed to marine environments, and inks with improved permanence characteristics for the most critical legal and commercial records. The development of specialized ink formulations required extensive experimentation with different combinations of approved components, as well as investigation of additional materials that might provide enhanced performance characteristics while maintaining compliance with the basic regulatory framework. The experimental work was conducted using systematic procedures that allowed for careful evaluation of each modification and its effects on ink performance. The specialized formulations gradually became integrated into the standard production procedures, with different grades of ink designated for different categories of documents based upon their importance and expected storage requirements. The highest grade inks reserved for the most critical official documents incorporated additional processing steps and quality control procedures that ensured maximum permanence and legibility over extended periods. During the quiet evening hours, when the busy activities of the commercial district had settled into the gentle rhythms of domestic life, Maestro Giovanni would often review the detailed records of production and quality control that documented each day's ink preparation activities. These records provided valuable information for maintaining consistency and identifying opportunities for further improvements in the standardization system that had become such an integral part of Genoa's expanding bureaucratic and commercial infrastructure.
The methodical placement of mile markers along Romanesque pilgrimage roads. How pilgrims knew how far they walked in the 1100s, in the quiet hush of the early 12th century, as the morning mist settled low over the rolling hills of southern France. Pilgrims from towns, hamlets, and far-off kingdoms began their sacred journeys westward towards Santiago de Compostela. Some walked alone, others in pairs or in slow-moving clusters. They bore walking sticks, broad-brimmed hats, and simple linen packs. Yet, despite their various languages, origins, and intentions, they all relied on one common thread beneath their feet: the old Roman roads that had been slowly reclaimed, adapted, and reshaped into the great pilgrimage routes of the Latin West. Though the road was ancient, its guidance was not. For centuries, wayfinding had been informal, landmarks passed along orally, turns marked with the memory of old trees, shrines and well-trodden forks. But by the 1100s, with the increasing number of pilgrims walking these roads year after year, it became apparent to clerical administrators and monastic overseers that a more consistent, regulated form of distance tracking would be needed. From this simple need emerged one of the most overlooked, yet thoroughly coordinated, bureaucratic undertakings of the medieval period: the placement of league markers, stone indicators of distance that would measure the journey not only in time and steps, but in solemn measured units. In the year 1123, following increasing complaints from various abbeys along the route from Le Puy to Roncesvalles, a synod was convened in the city of Béziers. There, beneath the vaulted ceilings of Saint Aphrodisias's chapter house, clerics, stone masons, scribes, and regional priors gathered to discuss issues related to road management. The first items on the docket were familiar: bridge maintenance, seasonal flooding, reports of vagabonds. But buried deep in the meeting's agenda was a quieter, seemingly mundane concern: the inconsistent use of distance measurement among pilgrims. One prior noted that his monastery recorded 32 leagues from its gates to Toulouse, while a neighboring abbey calculated 37 for the same stretch. These discrepancies caused confusion, not only for pilgrims, but also for the provisioning of bread, ale and beds along the way. Thus was born the Commitio ad signa logorum ordinanda, the Commission for the Ordering of League Markers. Composed initially of 6 members, the commission included a canon from the cathedral chapter in Narbonne, a notary trained in Roman metrology, 2 Benedictine monks with experience in rural surveying, a delegate from the Toulouse Guild of Stonecutters, and a Cistercian scribe well versed in codicological standards. Their task: to define a standard league, to determine its means of measurement, and to create a system by which this league could be visibly and durably marked across hundreds of miles of pilgrimage routes. At their first formal gathering in Toulouse in the spring of 1124, the commission deliberated long on the precise length of a league. Roman traditions offered one interpretation, about 1.48 modern miles, while French localities often varied, with leagues ranging from 3.5 to 5 kilometers. Ultimately, after numerous trials with calibrated rope, wheel-measured paths, and controlled pace counting, they settled on a canonical league of 3,000 human paces, equating to approximately 3.9 kilometers. This was ratified in the minutes of the second gathering, and henceforth referred to as the Luga Canonica. Measurement required consistency. For this they developed the triplex funiculus, a 3-strand measurement rope, woven from flax and treated with beeswax to prevent stretching. Each strand represented 1,000 paces, and was knotted every 100 paces with colored linen thread: blue for the first rope, red for the second, and green for the third. Each rope was wound onto an oaken spindle, stored in a felt-lined chest known as the capsa mensurae, and assigned to each regional surveying pair. For terrain measurement, teams of 3 were deployed. 2 men walked with the rope, reeling and anchoring as they progressed, while a third followed behind, marking each segment in a waxed log tablet. At the end of each league, a temporary wooden stake was driven into the soil, tagged with a wax-sealed slip of parchment, containing the date, distance and surveyor initials. These placeholders awaited the arrival of stone markers. The stones themselves were hewn from regionally available materials. In the south, limestone was preferred. In central France, granite. The design was standardized, 1.4 meters tall, tapering slightly toward the top, with a flat face on one side to bear numerals. Numerals were carved in uncial script, large, evenly spaced, and painted with oak gall ink mixed with vinegar and lampblack, to resist fading. Placement occurred in carefully timed installations. Stones were not placed during Lent or major feast weeks. Each priory was issued a document known as the Ordo Lapidum, a parchment scroll listing placement dates, stone numbers and installation prayers. Before placement, the stone's base was moistened with sanctified oil, and tapped 3 times with a consecrated mallet, while Psalm 26 was recited in low chant. A monk recorded the process in the Liber Logorum, a leather-bound register, with columns for date, location, stone material,
and names of the attending clerics. To ensure visibility, each marker was aligned perpendicular to the path, angled slightly to catch morning light. Stones installed in fog-prone areas received shallow notches along the side to aid in tactile identification. In areas of snow accumulation, stones were sometimes affixed with wooden caps bearing crosshatched texture to prevent loss beneath drifts. In dry, dusty regions, a small basin was carved at the stone's base to catch runoff, allowing for occasional rinsing and visibility preservation. One of the Commission's lesser-known subcommittees focused entirely on numbering logic. They debated whether numerals should count from east to west or west to east. Ultimately, it was decided that each route would count from its principal origin point, Le Puy, Arles, Vézelay, or Paris. Thus, a pilgrim walking towards Santiago would observe decreasing numbers as they approached Compostela. Exceptions were logged in the Addendum Numeralis, a supplemental record kept in each priory's archive chest. Standardization expanded in 1141 with the introduction of half-league stones. These were shorter, only 0.9 meters, and bore a single carved line bisecting a circle. By 1153, quarter-league markers followed, marked with simple dots in vertical alignment. These smaller indicators proved useful in terrain transitions, footpaths through forest, sudden forks or areas of seasonal water encroachment. To support upkeep, an order of itinerant clerks known as the Custodes Logarum was established. They traveled on muleback with panniers, containing brushes, ink, chisels, wax tablets and rope. Their duties included numeral retouching, ink reapplication, debris clearance, and basic realignment. Each carried a stamped lead medallion, identifying their office, and had the authority to requisition local aid in stone maintenance. Their logs, submitted monthly, were copied into centralized route registers held in Tours and Moissac. In 1167, a standard toolkit was described in the Inventarium Custodis, a document listing required tools by Latin name, weight, material, and replacement cycle. Each kit included calamus furius, iron stylus, unguentarium small jar of oil, penicillus linteus linen brush, and replumbatio, a small lid bob used for vertical alignment. Every item was marked with a monastic sigil to prevent theft or misplacement. The evolving system incorporated regional customization. In Burgundian segments, local lords were permitted to sponsor markers, provided they adhered to measurement protocols. Sponsored stones often bore coats of arms discreetly etched at the base. Some regions added Latin mottos, short phrases about patience, hope, or sanctity. These were recorded and approved by the Commission's Scripta Moralium, who ensured theological appropriateness. To accommodate the blind and infirm, tactile additions were introduced. Starting in 1179, select markers bore shallow grooves near the top, horizontal, for east-west routes, vertical for north-south branches. A codex of these tactile symbols was drafted and stored in the Cathedral Library of Limoges, under the title Signa Silentia, Signs of Quiet. By the year 1203, more than 1,200 primary markers and 3,000 auxiliary indicators had been installed across the pilgrimage roads of France and Iberia. A quarterly census, known as the Numerator, tracked these stones with entries including location code, stone number, condition tier, most recent visit date, and assigned maintenance party. Seasonal weather reports were cross-referenced with stoneware. In one instance, a storm report from 1211 correlates with a complaint of 3 stones in the Pyrenean foothills being partially submerged. Local monks responded by building small stone risers, raising the markers by 18 centimeters. The repair was logged, dated, and blessed. Ink recipes for numeral coloring became regulated as well. The Receptarium Atramenti of 1224 details 6 permitted ink formulas, ranked by durability, viscosity, and resistance to lichen. A preferred mix included gallnut, copper sulfate, and elder soot, boiled over low heat and sealed in lead-cap jars. Even wind direction played a part. In the open plains of Aquitaine, wind-eroded numerals led to the experimental creation of recessed alcove markers, stones with shallow hoods carved to protect inscriptions from prevailing breezes. The design was never widely adopted, but the prototype remains preserved in the Cloister Museum of Rodez. Eventually, stone-cutting workshops were required to submit sample numerals before large commissions. A review committee, the Examinatio Formarum, reviewed these samples quarterly. Criteria included line regularity, depth uniformity, and curve elegance. By 1240, the markers had become so embedded in monastic life that certain psalms were associated with specific league numbers. Pilgrims might whisper Psalm 43 upon reaching the 40th stone, or murmur Psalm 23 at the 23rd. This practice, though informal, was noted in marginalia by scribes who traveled the roads and recorded these soft rituals. And so the roads grew quieter still, lined with stone and shadow, measured and marked. The footsteps of pilgrims passed beside them, slow, steady, repetitive, guided by numbers carved with care, updated with ink, cleaned with linen, and counted out mile by mile, league by league, across a landscape of time and devotion.
The methodical placement of mile markers along Romanesque pilgrimage roads. How pilgrims knew how far they walked in the 1100s, in the quiet hush of the early 12th century, as the morning mist settled low over the rolling hills of southern France. Pilgrims from towns, hamlets, and far-off kingdoms began their sacred journeys westward towards Santiago de Compostela. Some walked alone, others in pairs, or in slow-moving clusters. They bore walking sticks, broad-brimmed hats, and simple linen packs. Yet, despite their various languages, origins, and intentions, they all relied on one common thread beneath their feet: the old Roman roads that had been slowly reclaimed, adapted, and reshaped into the great pilgrimage routes of the Latin West. Though the road was ancient, its guidance was not. For centuries, wayfinding had been informal, landmarks passed along orally, turns marked with the memory of old trees, shrines, and well-trodden forks. But by the 1100s, with the increasing number of pilgrims walking these roads year after year, it became apparent to clerical administrators and monastic overseers that a more consistent, regulated form of distance tracking would be needed. From this simple need emerged one of the most overlooked, yet thoroughly coordinated, bureaucratic undertakings of the medieval period: the placement of league markers, stone indicators of distance that would measure the journey not only in time and steps, but in solemn measured units. In the year 1123, following increasing complaints from various abbeys along the route from Le Puy to Roncesvalles, a synod was convened in the city of Béziers. There, beneath the vaulted ceilings of Saint Aphrodisias's chapter house, clerics, stonemasons, scribes, and regional priors gathered to discuss issues related to road management. The first items on the docket were familiar: bridge maintenance, seasonal flooding, reports of vagabonds. But buried deep in the meeting's agenda was a quieter, seemingly mundane concern: the inconsistent use of distance measurement among pilgrims. One prior noted that his monastery recorded 32 leagues from its gates to Toulouse, while a neighboring abbey calculated 37 for the same stretch. These discrepancies caused confusion not only for pilgrims, but also for the provisioning of bread, ale, and beds along the way. Thus was born the Commitio ad signa logorum ordinanda, the Commission for the Ordering of League Markers. Composed initially of 6 members, the commission included a canon from the cathedral chapter in Narbonne, a notary trained in Roman metrology, 2 Benedictine monks with experience in rural surveying, a delegate from the Toulouse Guild of Stonecutters, and a Cistercian scribe well versed in codicological standards. Their task: to define a standard league, to determine its means of measurement, and to create a system by which this league could be visibly and durably marked across hundreds of miles of pilgrimage routes. At their first formal gathering in Toulouse in the spring of 1124, the commission deliberated long on the precise length of a league. Roman traditions offered one interpretation, about 1.48 modern miles, while French localities often varied, with leagues ranging from 3.5 to 5 kilometers. Ultimately, after numerous trials with calibrated rope, wheel-measured paths, and controlled pace counting, they settled on a canonical league of 3,000 human paces,
equating to approximately 3.9 kilometers. This was ratified in the minutes of the second gathering, and henceforth referred to as the Luga Canonica. Measurement required consistency. For this they developed the triplex funiculus, a 3-strand measurement rope, woven from flax and treated with beeswax to prevent stretching. Each strand represented 1,000 paces, and was knotted every 100 paces with colored linen thread. Blue for the first rope, red for the second, and green for the third. Each rope was wound onto an oaken spindle, stored in a felt-lined chest known as the capsa mensurae, and assigned to each regional surveying pair. For terrain measurement, teams of 3 were deployed. 2 men walked with the rope, reeling and anchoring as they progressed, while a third followed behind, marking each segment in a waxed log tablet. At the end of each league, a temporary wooden stake was driven into the soil, tagged with a wax-sealed slip of parchment, containing the date, distance and surveyor initials. These placeholders awaited the arrival of stone markers. The stones themselves were hewn from regionally available materials. In the south, limestone was preferred. In central France, granite. The design was standardized, 1.4 meters tall, tapering slightly toward the top, with a flat face on one side to bear numerals. Numerals were carved in uncial script, large, evenly spaced, and painted with oak gall ink mixed with vinegar and lamp black, to resist fading. Placement occurred in carefully timed installations. Stones were not placed during Lent or major feast weeks. Each priory was issued a document known as the Ordo Lapidum, a parchment scroll listing placement dates, stone numbers and installation prayers. Before placement, the stone's base was moistened with sanctified oil, and tapped 3 times with a consecrated mallet, while Psalm 26 was recited in low chant. A monk recorded the process in the Liber Logarum, a leather-bound register, with columns for date, location, stone material, and names of the attending clerics. To ensure visibility, each marker was aligned perpendicular to the path, angled slightly to catch morning light. Stones installed in fog-prone areas received shallow notches along the side to aid in tactile identification. In areas of snow accumulation, stones were sometimes affixed with wooden caps bearing crosshatched texture to prevent loss beneath drifts. In dry, dusty regions, a small basin was carved at the stone's base to catch runoff, allowing for occasional rinsing and visibility preservation. One of the Commission's lesser-known subcommittees focused entirely on numbering logic. They debated whether numerals should count from east to west or west to east. Ultimately, it was decided that each route would count from its principal origin point, Le Puy, Arles, Vézelay, or Paris. Thus, a pilgrim walking towards Santiago would observe decreasing numbers as they approached Compostela. Exceptions were logged in the Addendum Numeralis, a supplemental record kept in each priory's archive chest. Standardization expanded in 1141 with the introduction of half-league stones. These were shorter, only 0.9 meters, and bore a single carved line bisecting a circle. By 1153, quarter-league markers followed, marked with simple dots in vertical alignment. These smaller indicators proved useful in terrain transitions, footpaths through forest, sudden forks or areas of seasonal water encroachment. To support upkeep, an order of itinerant clerks known as the Custodes Logarum was established. They traveled on muleback with panniers, containing brushes, ink, chisels, wax tablets and rope. Their duties included numeral retouching, ink reapplication, debris clearance, and basic realignment. Each carried a stamped lead medallion, identifying their office, and had the authority to requisition local aid in stone maintenance. Their logs, submitted monthly, were copied into centralized route registers held in Tours and Moissac. In 1167, a standard toolkit was described in the Inventarium Custodis, a document listing required tools by Latin name, weight, material, and replacement cycle. Each kit included calamus furius, iron stylus, unguentarium small jar of oil, penicillus linteus linen brush, and replumbatio, a small lid bob used for vertical alignment. Every item was marked with a monastic sigil, to prevent theft or misplacement. The evolving system incorporated regional customization. In Burgundian segments, Local lords were permitted to sponsor markers, provided they adhered to measurement protocols. Sponsored stones often bore coats of arms discreetly etched at the base. Some regions added Latin mottos, short phrases about patience, hope, or sanctity. These were recorded and approved by the Commission's Scripta Moralium, who ensured theological appropriateness. To accommodate the blind and infirm, tactile additions were introduced. Starting in 1179, select markers bore shallow grooves near the top, horizontal, for east-west routes, vertical for north-south branches. A codex of these tactile symbols was drafted and stored in the Cathedral Library of Limoges, under the title Signa Silentia, Signs of Quiet. By the year 1203, more than 1,200 primary markers and 3,000 auxiliary indicators had been installed across the pilgrimage roads of France and Iberia. A quarterly census, known as the Numerator, tracked these stones with entries including location code, stone number, condition tier, most recent visit date, and assigned maintenance party. Seasonal weather reports were cross-referenced with stone wear. In one instance, a storm report from 1211 correlates with a complaint of 3 stones in the Pyrenean foothills being partially submerged. Local monks responded by building small stone risers, raising the markers by 18 centimeters. The repair was logged, dated, and blessed. Ink recipes for numeral coloring became regulated as well. The Receptarium Atramenti of 1224 details 6 permitted ink formulas, ranked by durability, viscosity, and resistance to lichen. A preferred mix included gallnut, copper sulfate, and elder soot, boiled over low heat and sealed in lead-cap jars. Even wind direction played a part. In the open plains of Aquitaine, wind-eroded numerals led to the experimental creation of recessed alcove markers, stones with shallow hoods carved to protect inscriptions from prevailing breezes. The design was never widely adopted, but the prototype remains preserved in the Cloister Museum of Rodez. Eventually, stone-cutting workshops were required to submit sample numerals before large commissions. A review committee, the Examinatio Formarum, reviewed these samples quarterly. Criteria included line regularity, depth uniformity, and curve elegance. By 1240, the markers had become so embedded in monastic life that certain psalms were associated with specific league numbers. Pilgrims might whisper Psalm 43 upon reaching the 40th stone, or murmur Psalm 23 at the 23rd. This practice, though informal, was noted in marginalia by scribes who traveled the roads and recorded these soft rituals. And so the roads grew quieter still, lined with stone and shadow, measured and marked. The footsteps of pilgrims passed beside them, slow, steady, repetitive, guided by numbers carved with care, updated with ink, cleaned with linen, and counted out mile by mile, league by league, across a landscape of time and devotion.